So you've created your rules in Corticon JS Studio, and now you'd like to be able to run those rules as a serverless function with Azure Functions. We're going to show here how we can generate a business rule-driven Azure function, so no coding at all, generated into a self-contained JavaScript function that will effectively be as if you had custom coded an Azure function and are now ready to run it within the Azure portal. In contrast to generating rules into a decision service that will be run as a web service on a Corticon server instance, with Corticon JS, we're generating a self-contained JavaScript bundle. What does that mean? Self-contained means it is self-contained. There's everything you need to be able to execute the business logic defined within the rules, then and there within the JavaScript code, contained within just one file. JavaScript, specifically in this context, we're saying that this JavaScript can be run wherever JavaScript runs. In this case, we're going to be running it as a JavaScript function tailored for the Azure Function framework. Bundle meaning all of the different aspects of it are going to be captured within one JavaScript file. So a single file called decision service bundle.js will capture all of the different aspects of the business logic and the rules encapsulated into a wrapper that can be directly uploaded into Azure. For our purposes, let's take a look at how we might generate a JavaScript function for the Azure Function platform directly from this pre-built rule flow for a healthcare policy eligibility determination use case. So first, let's just see what the actual data is being, what the actual rules are doing to the input data in this use case. First, within this rule test. So here we see a household with various different persons, and we're going to assign them various different eligibility groups, and based upon those groups, their respective plans that they might be eligible for or not. So in Corticon, we have these rule tests that are similar to how we might test an API, but before we even generate the actual runtime code. So I'm going to quickly show how we can take this input and actually, instead of just running it within this test environment where we'll see the input and output, I can likewise copy to my clipboard the input from this rule test in order to test what I generate as this Azure function. So in just a moment, when we generate this Azure function and upload it onto Corticon, or upload it onto Microsoft Azure, we're going to see how we can paste what's come to our clipboard now, this input payload, as the vanilla JSON that Corticon will be expecting, but in this case, we'll be testing it against that live Azure function. Now, within Microsoft Azure, I'm going to get myself set up so that I can have a correct runtime environment ready to upload directly the rules generated into this Azure function that are coming from Corticon JS Studio in that previous step. So what I'm going to do is define some of the necessary parameters within the Create Function App option of Azure. These are all pretty much the boilerplate standard default options that I'm going with in order to just have a function app available within which I'm going to be able to create an individual function. When I'm all set with the configuration of creating this function app, I should see something that looks like this on the review panel. I'll then have this review and create button available. So I'll generate this resource, specifically a function app resource. I'll see my deployment in progress notification come up on the top right. Ultimately, I'll get a hopefully deployment succeeded notification. And finally, I'm going to go into the resource within Azure to configure what the actual code is doing and then test that actual code. So going into the specific function area where I can create a function in this function app, I'm going to click the Create Function App button, and we'll see what will come up. Will be a configuration panel where I'm just going to go with the standard option of setting an HTTP trigger for my function, give it a name, authorization level that might be necessary for your specific environment, and then we'll see our creating function notification in that top right-hand corner. When it's all ready, we'll get that success notification as well as before. We're going to go into where that function was created. The HTTP trigger 1 was the default name given to it. And what I'm going to do is first go into where the code is defined in the Azure portal, but subsequently I'm going to go back into my file system where this Azure function was generated based upon where I set the file path within my configuration of Corticon.js Studio when I generated it. So the rules that I've created within Corticon.js Studio have been transpiled from just those business rules and the business user written vernacular into JavaScript code that can run wherever JavaScript runs. And as an example of how we can integrate that decision service bundle into an Azure environment specifically, we will have this sample JavaScript code within this wrapper in order to demonstrate how we can invoke this decision service from an Azure function. My Azure function is created within the Azure portal. Let's take a look at this default index.js file, but also see how there's a sample function in there. In place of that, what I'm going to upload is the decision service bundle.js file containing all of the code for this decision service that was generated for Corticon.js to be able to be run as a Azure function. That said, this decision service bundle is interoperable across any JavaScript environment. The Azure specific aspect is what is in the other file within the file system there. So what we're going to see here is I'm going to copy to my clipboard that sample content, and I'm just going to overwrite what is in this default index.js and save that in order to now invoke the decision service using that sample code. Back within Corticon.js Studio, I'll again export this JSON to clipboard. Again, this is showing me what the rule test view of this decision service test case would look like, but under the covers, we're going to be invoking this decision service at runtime with the equivalent sort of input payload in a JSON structure. So I've copied that to my clipboard, and now let's go to the test/run button within the Azure portal, and we'll simply paste our clipboard into the body of this test case and go ahead and hit run. See, at a click of a button, we now have the precise same output as we saw a moment ago, this time in the JSON structure with the various different outputs of the eligibility determination defined within the rules as generated into this Azure function. Now, let's lastly make use of the function URL capability within the Azure function portal here and actually test this decision service directly from that Azure function URL in order to use some of our API testing tools you might be more comfortable with, such as Postman. So if I go ahead and copy and paste the function URL into the URL field of Postman, I'm going to take that same input JSON that we had defined within my test case in the Azure portal. I'm going to simply paste this just as I had before from the clipboard into this input panel, hit send, and we're going to see the exact same thing as well as a rapid response time from having made that outbound call and getting the response of the eligibility decision based upon the decision service that's running up on Azure now as an Azure function.